So good morning, everybody. As is pretty common with entrepreneurs, we don't take advice very well, so I won't do exactly what Will has told me to do. So I'll talk a little bit, starting from macro, going to micro, going back in history, and then coming back to today and the future again. And I think Tom said something about getting people to stand up, so let's start with that. Could all entrepreneurs stand up, please? Wow, that's great. So maybe adding former entrepreneurs who are now pursuing an academic career. Okay. And future entrepreneurs. You don't need to sit down, please remain standing up. Because what I wanted to point out is that for the people who are sitting down, did you notice that now you're looking up at the entrepreneurs? And I think there's something profoundly important there, because entrepreneurship is to be cherished and appreciated. I usually do this, please sit down. I usually do this at conferences where there are entrepreneurs, VCs and bankers. And I so enjoy having the VCs and bankers sit down and look up at the entrepreneurs. I think it's a healthy experience for both. So I'm a former entrepreneur, but I believe that entrepreneurship is not a career, it's not a profession, it's a state of mind. So I still feel that I'm the same kind of an entrepreneur that I have always been, since I was maybe 12 years old, when I started to figure out who I am and also pursuing entrepreneurial things. But let me start from a little while back. I'll talk a little bit about why I believe entrepreneurship is so profoundly important for the future of the world. Who knows how many medals Finland got in the 1924 Olympics? 20? Do you know how many we got in the London Olympics? Yeah. Yeah. So your guess was 20 in the 1924. We actually got 37. We got 14 gold medals. 1924. Why? Finland was a very poor country back in 1924. We couldn't afford coaches. We didn't have practice arenas. We didn't have a single stadium in the whole country. How come we got 14 gold medals and 37 medals overall? I think it was not because of us Finns as such. This speaks more about the importance of Europe in those days. Even a small European country was a sports powerhouse in those days. In the beginning of the 1900s, 1/4 of the world population resided in Europe. 1/4. And about 1/3 of the GDP. At the moment, only 10% of the world population lives in Europe. In some decades, it will be down to 7%. So we have come down from 25% to 7% in about 150 years. So Europe has diminished in importance in multiple ways. In 2050, the GDP of Europe will be down to 15%. Down from 1/3 in the beginning of the previous century. And of course we all know that while Europe is weakening, China, Asia overall are gaining. And we all know that the Chinese GDP relative portion is growing very rapidly. And the estimates vary, but the agreement is pretty strong that around 2030, 2040, China will have about a quarter of the world's GDP. So huge shift. And Chinese and Indians and other gainers in this game, they deserve this because they are working so hard. And they have worked so hard. Just like Finns worked so hard from the, let's say, 1850 onwards, when the Industrial Revolution happened in Finland. And we didn't have labor laws, we didn't have labor unions, we all worked our butts off. And we deserved the gains we made and the improvement in the quality of life, just like Chinese and Indians deserve the gains they are making in the quality of their life. The problem just is that we can't afford them to make these gains. We all have heard these estimates that at the moment the world as a whole is spending about 1.2 times what the globe produces per year. And if we all would be spending like the Brits, we would be spending 3 times what we can afford as a globe, as a world. And if we all would be spending like the Americans, we would be spending 7 times what we can afford. So it's very clear that when the 300 million middle class in China, which is about the same size as the US population, roughly, will be spending first like the Brits, and then having aspirations towards spending like the Americans. We jointly, collectively, we can't afford that. It's impossible. And of course, from the Chinese point of view, they're asking, you have been enjoying this quality of life for some centuries or at least several decades. What right do you have forbidding us to enjoy that quality of life now? To be fair, you should give it up now, because now it's our turn. That would only be fair. While we are looking at it, well, we have gotten used to this, so it would be more painful for us to give it up now, rather than you who have not gotten used to it. So there's no pain of giving up. And both parties maybe have a point. It's not a very good point, and it's not a solution. And I haven't even mentioned the climate warming or global pollution, which are mounting problems. Just from the consumption point of view, we have a huge challenge, which currently seems completely unsolvable. So we need to have transformational disruptions, basically in technology, for us to enable the improvement in the quality of life and life expectancy for the hundreds of millions and billions of people who deserve that and who are working so hard to get that. The only way we can generate these improvements in productivity, these new technologies, in my opinion, is through entrepreneurship. And as I said, entrepreneurship for me means a state of mind rather than a profession. And we need to have that state of mind, that aspiration, much more appreciated and widely exercised than what we are currently seeing. So what are we doing in the policy making to enable this to happen? It's actually quite interesting, again, to look at Europe, which is not the most dynamic economy, as we all know. But we have a long history of statistics and data. At the moment, in the 15 largest European countries, out of every 100 people, 46 people work. So 54 people do something else. They are retired, they are children, they're staying home, they're unemployed. So 46 people work. And out of these, 38 people work outside healthcare. So 46 people work, 8 of those work in healthcare. And if something doesn't dramatically change, by 2050, in these same countries, 38 people will work, so 62 will do something else. But the dramatic thing is that out of these 38, 20 will work outside healthcare. And assuming that healthcare is provided by the government, it means that 20 people will be working, and these are not even all working for private companies. Some of them will be working for the government in non-healthcare related areas. So let's say 17 or 16 will work outside the public sector. And those will be funding the life of the rest of the 84 people. Of course, this is again an equation that doesn't balance out. So we can't allow this to happen, but we are steadily moving in that direction. If we look at how in the EU, R&D and entrepreneurship and the search for these technological breakthroughs is being encouraged. If we take all subsidies in all EU member countries and the EU Commission overall, so all subsidies on the continent, at the moment 1/3 of these subsidies are spent on the coal industry and agriculture. 1/3. Can anybody guess how much is spent on technology and R&D? It's 8%. So that shows how we prioritize things. Nobody believes that coal mining and agriculture can save the world. But still we are outspending R&D and technology by a factor of 4 in coal mining and agriculture. It doesn't make any sense. We're being extremely short-sighted in this as in many other things. One aspect of entrepreneurial thinking is of course always focusing on the big problems, trying to make an impact on where it counts. It's actually meaningless to make small victories if the company goes bankrupt. So you sort of need to always focus on the big things. And that's the kind of entrepreneurial thinking that our politicians will have to learn. And we as citizens, we have to allow them to learn that while being re-elected. And now, of course, we are not allowing them to be re-elected if they exhibit any of these sensible behaviors. So it's not actually their fault, it's our fault. Because we are voting for the people who do the wrong things. And we don't vote for the people who make the tough decisions. In Finland, the importance and the focus on academic entrepreneurship has been a huge issue. When I grew up, my honest-to-God impression of an entrepreneur was a guy working in a greasy car repair shop, alone, in cold and, a garage that was almost about to fall over. That was my impression. That's what I was raised up with. That's what I gathered from all around, from the news, from the newspapers, from my parents, from my friends. And even today, if we take the statistics of the Finnish Union of Entrepreneurs, and they look at all the requests for advice and help they get, only 20% of those requests come from people with an academic background, with a higher university degree. And this has been greatly improved over the past 15 years. So now we have reached the level of maybe 20% of entrepreneurs having at least a master's degree. Not a very good situation. George Bernard Shaw once said, "Some men see things as they are and ask why. Others dream things that never were and ask why not." For me, this is a fairly confusing statement from Mr. Shaw, but to me it sort of means the difference between an academic and an entrepreneur. Some people see things how they are and they ask why. They want to understand, how does the world work? They are the great academicians. Some people dream of what never was and they ask why not. That's the entrepreneurial spirit. Maybe something could be drastically different. And why not? And we need to combine these two. We need to get not necessarily more of the look at the world and ask why does it work like that to the entrepreneurial side, but we definitely need to get more of this why not thinking into the academia. So I became an entrepreneur actually a long time ago. Time flies. I founded F-Secure 24 years ago. But I actually became an entrepreneur in spirit when I was about 12 years old, when I started working to get some pocket money. And I worked all the sorts of odd jobs that you can imagine people at that age can work at. And at the age of 15, I started selling meat at a butcher's shop. And in 6 months, I was the head of the butcher department when I was there. Of course, I was only working a couple nights and weekends because I was at school. And after 12 months, I was the longest working employee in that store. So it was not a great store. And once I got out of there, I never have bought anything from that chain of stores again. But it was an interesting experience for a 15-year-old. And then I started, as IT was my hobby and my passion, I started advising Finnish companies around the age of 15, 16 on how to utilize PCs. So I was a consultant. At that age and time, PCs were a new thing, and PC networks were a very new thing. And the corporate IT departments didn't really understand PCs or PC networks. So I was actually able to help them in that. And that was fun because I got all the latest PCs to use and learn about new stuff. I often was about 5 minutes ahead of my customers in learning. But as long as I kept that 5-minute gap, I was okay. And they never figured out that it was only 5 minutes. So I barely survived. I started writing for the computer IT or IT magazines, both for home computing as well as business computing, writing reviews and again learning while doing that. Often writing a review about a equipment category that I knew nothing about when I started the project. When I had finished the review, I knew a little bit about it, or enough to write a review where nobody figured out that I was again 5 minutes ahead of the reader. I started also becoming more and more interested in computer security. So I co-wrote a book on computer security to learn about it. It's a good way to learn. You create a project, you have a deadline, and you have your own aspiration to do a reasonably good job. So you work very hard and you learn. And then of course when you have the book, you are an official expert. It's a badge of proof of expertise. I also started becoming interested in project management. So I found myself teaching, for example, all the maintenance personnel of the Finnish nuclear power plants on project management. And again, I was only 5 minutes ahead of them. I almost started getting cold feet while doing that. But Finland has perhaps the best track record of keeping our nuclear power plants up and running in the world, so I didn't really disrupt that. So that was good. And out of all these types of things, and there were one more area of expertise that I got into was desktop publishing, which is really interesting for me. So after writing some stuff and training people, one experience that has stuck to my mind was I was probably 17 or 18. I found myself in a remote city in eastern Finland where there's a traditional publishing house with their own newspaper, regional newspaper. And the CEO of the publishing house told me that here's our staff, at maybe 80 people. You need to train them to do desktop publishing instead of traditional page creation. And you need to pick who will be fired and who can stay, because we don't need all those people after they learn to do desktop publishing. And that was tough and unfair. They basically outsourced the decision who to lay off to a 17-year-old kid. But that was a sort of a growing experience. And we managed to do it so that the people felt it was fair. And that was the best possible outcome. They didn't like it, very unhappy, but they felt that the process was fair and transparent. So then I started studying here. I studied business strategy, international marketing, and international law. Of course, from a background of really loving physics and math, what I ended up studying here didn't really make much sense. But it was the most interesting subjects that I could find from the curriculum in those days. And my experience was not very good, so I apologize in advance. I don't have many good things to say about the school in those days. But some. I tried to list pluses and minuses, and I got 1 plus and probably 8 minuses. So the environment was really not pro-entrepreneurial in those days. Nobody really talked about entrepreneurship. And the teachers really didn't want to teach. And they really didn't make an effort to understand whether somebody learned something. And that was the most disappointing thing for me, which sort of carried much more weight than it maybe should have, because I expected differently. When I enrolled, I expected that, hey, now I will have teachers who really have things to share and who will push me hard, and they did nothing of that kind. As long as I passed the exams, they had absolutely no interest in what I thought or what I had learned or whether I had learned anything. And that pain still sticks with me. Because of these high expectations, I crashed down to below ground level. I knew one other entrepreneur in the school in those days. There definitely were more, but in my sort of circle of friends and buddies, there was only one. And I didn't know anybody who wanted to become one. At least they did not have the courage to express that desire. So but actually I have to thank the school for founding F-Secure. Because what we did with a friend of mine who was also advising Finnish corporations on IT, we did a course together, and as part of that course, as a sort of a practice, the students had to fill in the papers to start a company. And we just returned that paper. Sort of a spur of the moment type of thing. And we thought that taxation-wise it would be sensible because we were both doing consulting work and it was much easier through a company. So that was definitely positive. And I saw great recruiting opportunities. Because what my company did in the early days was continue what I did, i.e. training people to use computers. Project management, desktop publishing, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, etc., etc. So I hired a lot of my fellow students. And the interesting thing was that after we founded the company and started business, and we were the biggest Mac training company in the country within maybe 6-9 months. And it created absolutely no interest in my student buddies. Nobody sort of asked, well, how does it feel, or isn't that great? It was ignored. And I was maybe a bit ashamed of that, sort of, in a funny sort of a way, so I didn't bring it up. So we absolutely didn't talk about that. And going back to the teaching, there was a very strong, what I almost felt, aversion to the transfer of practical competencies. Theory was everything, but practical understanding and application of that knowledge was not valued. And that was, again, sort of understandable, but very disappointing from my point of view. And then later on, as I grew my company, we grew at an average of 80% annually from 1988, when the company was founded, till the year 2000. So fairly rapid growth. We still are not a large company. We have about 1,000 employees at the moment. But fairly rapid growth, and I became very interested in management sciences, in strategy, research. And what I found out there was, again, disappointing, and I apologize for that. And things have improved dramatically since on many of these counts. But if I would have to describe shortly how the management science researchers and the practitioners, i.e. CEOs, how those interrelate, I would say that the researcher attitude is that the more complicated your expression, the better researcher you are. And it's so weird. CEOs never read management science or strategy research. They don't. Never. Because they can't understand a word of it. It's weird. Why isn't there a desire to get the key practitioners to read what the researcher writes? The researcher really wants his fellow researchers to read what he writes. And I can't understand that. A little bit of an entrepreneurial attitude there for the researchers would help a lot. Because you want to make a change, you want to make an impact, you want to achieve something visible. And you won't if the practitioners don't read what you are doing. And it has gone so far that CEOs don't really make an effort to read the science of their job. They read the famous books that come out once every year, where there's 300 pages and one idea. And it's very simple to understand. It's looked at all possible angles. But that's not the research that is being carried out. And there's so much value in the research. I have spent quite a bit of time trying to read the research as well. And I think there are hugely valuable gold nuggets or unpolished gems in the research that at large the business community has not uncovered at all, or not even made an effort to understand. So I think there's huge value already in the field of academia for businesses, just to be uncovered and used, just within the field of strategy research. But I'd like to end by, and hope to have a discussion on these topics, end by just repeating that, in my opinion, entrepreneurship is a state of mind, full stop. It's about pragmatism, it's about ambition, it's about dreams, it's about perseverance, and it's definitely about eternal optimism coupled with the ability to give up and start again. And how do you teach entrepreneurialism? I think 4 key cardinalities of that for me would be a desire for real learning, a desire for results from the teacher, because that's what the entrepreneur would do. He would want to get results. Agree in advance what those results should be, and then push like hell to get those results. Again, lead by example, but also teach by example. It should be made much easier for business leaders to periodically pursue academic careers. So spend a few years, and I know that this is much easier in some other countries, but in Finland it's not easy. And it's not common. And we need to find ways to change the desired behavior from the inside in universities. And I think one good way would be to introduce a fresh point of view by bringing business leaders in as teachers, as professors. And then this pursuit of pragmatism overall, which is closely linked and coupled to being aspirational and wanting results, but being extremely pragmatic and trying to change the value framework so that the complexity of the expression is not desirable. The learning and understanding by the students is desirable, and that's held in high academic esteem. So I think we have huge challenges, and only through the entrepreneurial thinking and mindset can we hope to solve these global challenges, which require technological breakthroughs of a huge scale. And I think we have what it takes to do that, but we need to wake up, and we need to change our behavior. And we need to change the behavior of others. But as all entrepreneurs, I'm an eternal optimist, And I'm convinced that we'll do that. We'll have to kill our darlings many times, try something, doesn't work, kill it, start again, but always remain optimists. So I'd love to have a chat about these topics or any other topics if you have any thoughts. I hope I didn't shock you or depress you too much.
Not at all. All right, well, let's kick off. Actually, you're in charge of this.
Okay, so I can just.
I remember when I was younger, I was in front of a headhunter, and he asked me what I was after, and I said, well, I'm curious, but I'm not after the money. And I think he told me it's a big mistake. You didn't mention making money except making pocket money when you were a kid. But what about making money on entrepreneurship? Which seems to be a taboo in Europe.
It is a taboo. It is. I think it's well highlighted by something that I almost detest that the new French president just said. He said that I don't like rich people. Categorically. He doesn't like rich people. Regardless of who they are, what kind of individuals they are, he doesn't like them. So think about that as a statement to the young. Because in our society, the rewards are tied to the achievements. And it makes sense to me. And it should not be so that if you achieve your goals as an entrepreneur or as a leader, as a creator of new things, then you need to be ashamed of the side effect, which is wealth. But I'm also a strong believer in Maslow's model. And I really wanted the pocket money when I was 12 and 15 because I didn't have any money. I couldn't buy a stereo set. I couldn't buy a bike because I didn't have money. Once the company started becoming successful, I had enough money to buy a house and a bike and a car. I have not wanted more. It's not what I think about. It's the higher levels of the Maslow's model that get me fired up. It's making that impact, creating that change. And then money may follow, but it doesn't really matter to me. Other people think differently.
So talking about money, one of the differences between Europe and Silicon Valley is the participation by employees, startups in stock options packages, in terms of numbers of employees and numbers of shares. And in Finland today and broadly across Europe, the percentage of equity that is shared with early employees is really, really small. I mean, in some startups that are quite well known, less than 5%, whereas major U.S. companies that go public, participation can be anywhere from 10 to 25, even 30%. This has major ecosystem impacts because then you don't create a new generation of angel investors, entrepreneurs who can go on to start and fund their own companies. I've talked with the most senior VCs in Finland about this issue. I don't see this being discussed. I mean, isn't there a kind of social, ethical obligation to, at some level, in terms of ecosystem impact, to broaden stock option participation by employees coming out of startups so that you're creating major new numbers of entrepreneurs and angels on a regular basis?
I think this is a complicated issue. As I said, I'm an investor in maybe 25 startups in Finland and a few outside Finland. And what I have always used as a rule of thumb is that at the time of the liquidation event, the dilution from employee option programs would be around 20%. The problem is that for so many Finnish companies, the liquidation event doesn't happen. And we need to do a down round, and then a second down round. And we typically don't keep the employee option programs up at that level, because that also feels bad, also in public companies. When the company's profitability goes down, or when the company doesn't achieve the targets it sets itself, that the management proposes and the board approves, it feels not right keeping the incentive levels at the same level regardless of the constant failure. So I think it is a more complicated issue. For the best companies that really make it, I think we are often achieving the 10 and north of that levels of dilution. But then after a number of down rounds, it often changes. But I don't really hear opposing voices to this 20% rule of thumb from the Finnish VCs or other angel investors. So I think there's acceptance of that level, but the reality often turns out to be different, not through desire, but just happens. There's
So you seem to have a highly, how should I say, moral and ethical view on entrepreneurship. And you didn't mention that as any part of like the entrepreneurial education. So how do you say, how do we distill or instill into future students, even regardless of whether they want to become entrepreneurs or not, this thinking of you know, impact meaning something positive in the sense that you brought out?
Yeah, maybe I missed that part because I don't feel that it is the role of the school or the universities to do that. It's the role of the parents to teach their kids how to behave and what the values should be. I think it's too late if you have to teach it at the university. But of course, that doesn't mean that you should ignore it. Even though I omitted it, you should not. And maybe the best way to teach the good values is through examples. And of course there are entrepreneurs who create cultures that are not very nice and that are very centered on the leader, cults almost. Some of these companies are hugely successful. So who can blame them? Sort of people see a halo around the whole company and they ignore the culture. I think differently, but I can't claim to be right there. There is certain level of justification in being successful as long as you don't do things that are clearly wrong, but you may do things that are not clearly right either, at least in my value system. It's a tough question, so maybe very open discussion from all points of view through different examples and inviting different types of entrepreneurs to speak is the way to at least build a more holistic understanding of what is there. That's a very good point. I hadn't actually thought about that.
Okay, thanks for the nice speech, Mr. Risto. My name is Costa. I'm from Brazil. I think I'm the only one from Brazil in this audience. But you said something quite interesting about the CEOs not reading research which is done at universities. I'd like you to tell me, why do you think those researches are not read I have a hypothesis because what I think is that universities, the academia, they want statistic sophistication. This year, I sent 2 articles for a famous Brazilian academic event, and one of them was talking about a real problem in Goiânia, which is a city in central Brazil, with the population, 2/3 of the population has many problems in public transportation. And this article was not accepted. It was a real problem, and about 700,000 people in Goiânia had this problem. And the other one was accepted and was something quite sophisticated about investments, and a very not, how to say, it's about choosing different kinds of investments with a different way of an algorithm to choose that. So my hypothesis is that the university and the academia, they are, the values of them is in, how to say, this is good to be sophisticated, and this is ahead of the time, but maybe this is not, this does not interest to CEOs, is not focused on the problems they have, on the daily worries.
Well, this, as all real-world problems, is a multifaceted problem. But let me give you a couple answers there. Hands up, who knows what the diseconomics of time decompression is? Diseconomics of time compression, that's called a head start. Somebody has a head start in introducing a new product, so they have they create an effect to their competitors which is making it not economical for these followers to catch up through compressing time and investing so much in R&D that they can actually catch the company that has a head start. So why do you call it diseconomics of time compression? Why the hell? When you could just talk about a head start. And this is one reason why CEOs don't read the research, because they don't understand what you're writing. And I'd say that the fundamental reason is, of course, that you don't intend them to understand what you're writing. And why do you not intend them to understand it? Because the incentive systems created in academia are not encouraging you to make them understand. They are not the audience. So incentive systems here, as everywhere, are often at the root of what we do. And sometimes when what we do, it doesn't make sense, we need to change the incentive system. And that is again something that no one individual can change, but collectively we can all try to help that change happen. CEOs don't want to be, and no human being wants to feel stupid or ignorant. So why the heck would we read a paper where we have to read every line 10 times and we still don't understand what it says?
Hello, Mr. Risto. My name is Sanjay. I'm from India, and I'm part of a visiting delegation from the government of India. So we are setting up a whole telecom incubator in India. In fact, we're setting up the largest telecom incubator in the world back there. And I was trying to recollect what you were saying on how you built a startup when you were around 15, 16, and how the education system wasn't conducive enough to be an entrepreneur. We face the same issue back home, where the education system is totally broken and nobody is willing to accept it. It's a system where there is no innovation or creativity. All we are expected to do is study from a text, and there's a question paper which comes and reproduces the same things. So I see, your journey as or our journey possibly as 30 years back when you started. So what do you think was the biggest catalyst, or what do you think will be the biggest catalyst which will enable countries like ours to really empower the youth to be entrepreneurs? And what change would be needed in the education system?
I think it's a question of selecting teachers. And it's a question of building the right incentive framework for teaching and creating a shared sense of purpose for the students and the teachers. There's a great book that I recently read, and I don't remember its name, unfortunately. It told about the heuristics of picking the right people. And this writer had researched the US Special Forces selection process, and the learning there was that you cannot pick the people that will perform best. And they have been doing this for decades. So they have thousands of examples of special forces soldiers in combat situations. So they can see in hindsight who performed, who managed under those circumstances, and then compare that with the notes from the training period and from the selection period to the training. So they have done extensive research on that, and they found out that they can see more of the quality of the person when they have a team of 6 people ordered to move a wagon with a broken axle and only 1 wheel and 200 kilos of all sorts of metal pieces 10 kilometers along a muddy road, and they just walk alongside and watch what they say, how they interact, who gets depressed, who's excited, who gives energy to others, who sucks that energy out of the others, than from reading all the hundreds of pages of these career soldiers' histories. And there were examples from picking teachers to the inner city schools in the US, where most teachers don't want to go, and a really tough job. What kind of teachers actually make a huge change? Again, the qualities that in the end turned out to be decisive were not the ones that they would have picked in the beginning. But again, they sort of backtracked, looking at the track records of individuals, and then looked back at the paper trail. What kind of histories did those people have when they decided to become teachers? And what kind of personal qualities? It's a really great book. Don't know if you can Google it with these. Actually, use Bing. Bing is good. So I think you can probably find it. And there were examples of neurosurgeons and interesting careers and what qualities make people successful. So I think we should think and do a little bit of research from that point of view as well. Who are the teachers and researchers in our field who have actually made the biggest impact? What qualities do they have? And some of those qualities you can adopt. Some of those are such that, you have to be born with them, but not all. But the people who pick the future teachers, they should study that carefully. So thanks.